1978, the Communist People's Democratic Republic of Afghanistan murdered Sardar Mohammed Daoud and his entire family, Daoud. It was known as the Great Tsar Revolution. In 1979, as part of the Cold War strategy, Jimmy Carter's administration began funding the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence, who trained and funded the Mujahideen. This continued into the Reagan and Bush administrations. This caused a unique situation. As they were friendly to the USSR, the official Afghan government began having to deal with dissent constantly. The USSR intervened on the 24th of December, 1979, citing the 1978 Treaty of Friendship, Cooperation, and Good Neighborliness that had been signed between the two countries. The USSR was eventually pushed out in 1989 after years of resistance and guerrilla fighting by the Mujahideen. I don't know why that word is so hard. Funded by the U.S. After their withdrawal, the U.S. lost interest in the nation of Afghanistan, leaving a void in leadership. The warlords who fought against the USSR to push out communism now had an entire country to do as they wish. Pakistan used this opportunity to unify many of these warlords and involve their own ISI agency in creating the Taliban government. The rest is history, but it is interesting to note that by 2001, the Taliban had managed to almost completely end the cultivation of opium within its borders, along with various human rights violations, such as no education for women, and the total enforcement of Sharia law. Their time there was ticking. Or was it? No more opium? More on this later. Let's fast forward to the current war in Iraq. You have a foreign nation attempting to enforce their government's ideals upon a people who previously weren't allowed to even entertain such a thought. You also have an insurgency funded by a neighbor, make that two neighbors, Iran and Syria, since Bush accuses Syria of harboring terrorists. Not to mention, many of the born and raised Iraqis themselves are taking sides and taking arms, not against the U.S. or the Iranian-backed insurgency, but each other, the Sunni versus Shiites. This is very much like what happened in Afghanistan when the USSR was involved, in that the various leaders of the Mujahideen began quarreling to obtain the eventual seat of power that would come after the USSR's withdrawal. The Sunni do not want to be marginalized in a Shiite majority country. The Shiite wish not to ever again be controlled by the Sunni. They have taken the opportunity to attempt to eradicate each other to solve the problem. The Kurds still seem to just want a country of their own. The difference between the two conflicts is that the U.S. is totally ignoring the fact that they themselves had used the proxy strategy to bleed their enemy in Afghanistan. Now the various insurgency groups are using the same strategy against them. Okay, times are different. The Cold War is over, but the U.S. is outgunned. Take, for example, the recent street marches perpetrated by some of these militias in major Iraqi cities. This has been in the news the past couple of days. The U.S. has actually taken the strategy of making major camps on the outskirts of town and really only involving themselves in skirmishes should they feel it could destroy the city or threaten their bases. I'm drawing from recent quotes by some of the military leaders over there. I'm not making this up. There are currently over 300,000 Iraqi security personnel trained, which makes you wonder what they're doing right now, as compared to approximately 140,000 U.S. troops. Al-Sadr has proclaimed Sunni control over many Sunni-majority provinces. Even those Iraqi security forces are taking sides and aiding the death squads. Where am I going with all of this? In this modern world where the U.S. claims they choose diplomacy over action, which we all know is false, why don't they lay down their concerns over the Iranian nuclear problem for a minute and ask them to intervene? This war in Iraq very much concerns Iran, as they are neighbors. Syria as well. Should we be involving established forces in the region to assist in stabilizing it? Of course not. The U.S. is afraid that Iran would influence too heavily. The funny thing is, they already are. Iraq is quickly slipping into total chaos. The U.S. is losing this battle, as demonstrated by the militia marches. Wouldn't a decent exit strategy to be allow Iran to become involved? No matter how it goes, Shiite majority Iranian influence will be heavy in Iraq, as it is now, and probably will always be without Saddam Hussein around. The Iraqis will continue to resist U.S. troops. If the U.S. pulls out right now, it will fall into the hands of these warlords. Then the neighbors will work with the warlords to create a regionally friendly government, just as it did in Afghanistan after the USSR ran out of money. So the U.S. must ask itself, Would it rather suffer the same fate as the USSR, or learn from its own experience in watching the USSR's mistakes and allow a country like Iran, along with support from Syria, to simply take the burden? In doing so, the Iranian-funded militias would go crazy with no enemy but themselves, which Iran would perceive as a threat to their own sovereignty. Stop the funding and quietly help Iraq back onto its feet. Iran standing alone in this wouldn't be possible. They would need the help of the United States, and the United States should comply. In other words, involve the neighbors now, because you are currently fighting against them by proxy anyway. And you could save a lot of money in the long run. But really, who cares about money when you're liberating the Iraqi people? The reason I mentioned opium earlier was because, as I stated in a past video of mine, opium production in Afghanistan is now at an all-time high. As you're listening to news about what's going on in Iraq, and think about the U.S.'s involvement, and look up the Afghanistan conflict of the 80s. Read about it. You will see a pattern. It should alarm you. But now let me ask a question. Theory. Is societal evolution real in a sense that it follows timelines? Take this in. The Communist Manifesto was written by Karl Marx in 1848. In it he stated that true communism would be born from a capitalist mode of production. But not immediately. That was impossible. Now let's go stratospheric for a minute and imagine that around the same time various leaders of the world saw the genius in Marx's writings, but instead decided to distort them. Maybe starting around 1900 or so, real efforts were made to implement these ideals, which were extremely perverted from the original writings in various ways, after years of baby steps. On one side of the world you had the October Revolution in 1917, which was in Russia. It attempted to implement communism full force, from the ground up. Instead of relying on Marx's words that communism would have to be built on a foundation of strong capitalism. We all know what happened to Russia. On the other side of the world, you have the strongest capitalist system in history, and that system, based on the Federal Reserve, was founded in 1913. Anyway, just a little mind drift, food for thought. Just wondering how much time is left on the clock for America's style of communism, considering they are making the same mistakes that their brothers in Russia made in Afghanistan. Good night.